Hi, my name is Kruno. Welcome to my talk. The title of my talk is Welcome to the World of Technical Writing, a guide for newcomers. So first, let's start about me. What is my past experience with technical writing and IT in general? So my last position as a technical writer was at a startup called Memgraph. I was first part of the DevRel, Developer Relations team, Developer Experience team. And besides writing on the documentation, I was also engaging with community over our social media or Discord's channel. I was in charge of the content distribution. I was writing blog posts. And then some 9 months ago, I was transferred to the engineering team and I became the documentation owner. At that point, I was actually documentation team of one, but that doesn't mean that I was the only one who was working on the documentation, as you will see a little bit later. How did I even end up in technical writing? Well, a few years ago, I've covered that topic in my previous talk on the Write the Docs Prague 2020. So if you want to hear more about that, do check out the YouTube video on the Write the Docs channel. But basically, some 25 years ago, when I entered the world of IT, I started to work as a system administrator. I worked on a bunch of different operating systems, from old Unix systems, Silicon Graphics, DEX stations, over the whole plejada of Windows operating systems. And after 10 to 12 years of that, I've switched to user support and education. And that is where my journey to technical writing began. I started writing courseware materials, blog posts, maintaining all sorts of documentation. And lately now I've switched back more towards DevOps and system administration. So for example, while I was working at Memgraph, one of the things that we were using is Docker for distribution of our product as a Docker image. And one of the tasks that I was assigned was to create a Mangrove Docker extension. I've done that, but I've also created a bunch of content related to that, such as a blog post, instructions on how to do it, maintaining the GitHub repo, etc. So you could say that I've somewhat switched back to the system administration part. So I made a full circle. If you're on this lecture, you're probably wondering, is the technical writing for you? So when I started as a technical writer, I was sure that it is the right choice for me because one of the things that I enjoy the most is transferring my knowledge to other people and helping people to learn new things. Technical writing isn't just about writing. It is so much more. This is an exciting career. It's never a dull moment because you're covering things that are changing constantly. New versions are coming, devices are being improved, new methods are being developed, and you need to cover all of that and explain them in a way that people, users who will use that product, can understand it. So there is much of communication involved in technical writing, which isn't necessarily just writing skills. You will be recording videos like this one, or creating graphics, or working along other teams on creating some type of content. So you need to know how to communicate. The better you communicate, you will transfer the knowledge that you want to give to your users in more meaningful and easier way, so they can comprehend it much faster and they can ingest that knowledge that you wanted to pass on to them. As a technical writer, you will almost certainly work alongside other people. You will collaborate with many different teams, with many that have different backgrounds, and you will probably join teams that you have never thought that you will join them, at a certain point. So for example, in Mangrove, I was a part of engineering team. All of the other team members there were developers. I'm not a developer. I never was a developer. I can read some of the code, but I'm no way at the level that they are. So I needed to find a way to communicate with them, to get all of the info that I need, and to provide them with the feedback. Because when you're working on the documentation, you get a lot of feedback from the users, and you can use that feedback to make your product even better. And to do all of that, you need to communicate often and a lot. So maybe you will be part of a large team. Maybe that team will be one person team, so you will be the technical writing team. I've been in both situations. Each of those situations has its pros and cons. First, I would cover this part where you are the whole team. On one side, this is a great thing because everything, you're in charge of everything, you know. You're the alpha and omega, so everything is as you set it up. You set your own flow, your work process, but that can be rather lonesome at certain points. I enjoyed much more when I was a part of a team, when I had somebody with whom I could exchange ideas, you know, about the documentation, because you communicate with others the whole time about the topics that you need to cover in documentation. But you sometimes want to talk about the workflow, the problems that you encounter during, I don't know, deployment of the documentation and stuff like that. So for me, I personally loved a little bit more when I was a part of a team than when I was a solo writer or the technical team of one. But regardless of the size of your team, you need the communication skills. You will also be collaborating probably with other teams, depending on the size of the company. So earlier I mentioned that I was working on a blog post. When you're working on a blog post, you're collaborating with other teams that are not product related teams, that are not engineers. So you will be working with designers, marketing team, business development, user support, etc. And they will all at certain point refer the users to the documentation. And it is a good thing to also consult all of them when you're doing some changes to the documentation. For example, if you're changing a wording, or if new pages are being introduced to the documentation, it is a good thing to let the user support team know, hey, we have a bunch of new pages, so if you have users asking about the new features that we have just released, tell them to check out the release notes, you know, and they will find all of the info there. So you need to make sure that all of that information is flowing throughout the company. Sometimes when you start working on an assignment, you will find that maybe some details are missing. You don't have all the info. For whom is that documentation intended? Is it for some novice user or for the expert user? At which level do you need to explain certain concepts? Maybe this is an upgrade to existing documentation. Maybe this is something that is being written from the scratch. So first, as a documentation person in your company, you will probably know all of the documentation, the layout, the knowledge bases, where they are located. So go through them and see if you can find the answers to the questions by yourself. If you cannot, prepare them. For whom? For the persons that will most definitely know the answers to your questions, and those are subject matter experts. If you have a developer who was working on a certain feature, trust me, nobody knows that feature better than the developer that has developed it. So ask them ask that person for the additional information, for the input. You know, ask them for the clarification, and be prepared to accept what they have told you, because in this case they are the single source of truth. They know how things work, and try to incorporate that knowledge that you have gotten from your subject matter expert into your documentation. But if something is not clear, go back, ask again and again until you understand what exactly you need to document. Because if you don't understand it, how can you write a good documentation about it? Once you have all of the info gathered and you have everything that you need to start working on the documentation task, you will probably reach out for some of the tools that you're using. Which tools will that be? Probably depends on the company setting, maybe some legacy, but maybe you're the first technical writer in that company, so you will be the one that will define the standards, that will define the markup language being used, framework that will be used, maybe, or wiki page or content management system, or maybe some help authoring tool. It all depends. But some of those tools are pretty much universal these days. Markdown as a language is something that I would say is a must-have knowledge for every technical writer. Markdown is pretty easy. It's not complicated. It doesn't have so many options. You know, you won't be able to do all of the wonders of formatting that you can do, for example, with HTML or CSS using plain Markdown, but there are also versions of Markdown that are extended. So don't be surprised, you know, if you find something and say, oh, wait, this should be documentation in Markdown format, but this looks like some, I don't know, HTML command or something like that. I've worked with some frameworks that allow you to insert, I don't know, Next.js or React components within your documentation, and with that you can extend the features and the way that the content is being displayed and rendered. But basic Markdown is almost the same everywhere, so be sure to use it. HTML, well, you will encounter it on every single web page. So if you're maybe using some content management system, I don't know, maybe you're maintaining a website or you're using some CMS like WordPress, sometimes you will need to go into the HTML and make some changes. So knowledge of HTML is a good thing. And then, of course, there is CSS. If you need some additional styling, you won't be able to do it without CSS. For example, I got tasked with the assignment to prepare our web, which we used Nextra framework to publish documentation, and I got tasked with creating dark mode. You know, so I had to update our CSS, global CSS, so that our documentation site looks great, both in light mode and in dark mode. The designers have prepared all of the code, but I had to implement it. And the knowledge of CSS comes in very handy, you know, because you know where to put, how to put it, how to format it, etc. So now we come to the frameworks for building documentation sites. There is a bunch of them. These three that I've listed here, Docusaurus, MKDocs, and Extra, are the ones that we are using at MemGraph. And I'm familiar with them. I've used all of them. Each of them has its pros and cons. What I like about all three of them, they're open source. They have a great community. You can find a bunch of resources for each of them. So maybe it comes down, you know, if you're React person or Next.js, or maybe you're more into the Python world, you will probably choose the framework based on that. But I encourage you to look at all three of those frameworks if you're starting to build a new documentation website, and choose the one that you feel like, you know, that makes your heart tick a little bit faster. You know, it doesn't matter. Maybe it's something that you're familiar with, or maybe this is a challenge for you. You know, you want to introduce something new. So be sure to check them out. They all offer similar things, but some of them are more advanced in certain areas and fields. for example, with extensibility or possibility, to quickly do something like implement documentation versioning. Maybe you will be using some other tools, such as content management systems, as I've mentioned. I don't know, while I was working as a contractor, I was working on one website where all of the documentation was stored within the WordPress. And on other occasion, I was using wiki documentation, Confluence wiki based. Well, a long time ago, I've also used Metcalfware to have a single source and then to produce the output in different formats. So there is a bunch of tools, and you need to choose the one that fits your purpose. Also, on top of those tools, which I would call big ones, there is a bunch of tools that could make your work easier. A great screenshotting tool is something that will take you a long way, and if you have a screenshotting tool that has, I don't know, annotations or certain types of arrows, or allows you to predefine the color palettes that you will use, it is a great time saver, especially if you're working in a team, and then you can share those settings for those assets across the team, maybe with the designers that are preparing screenshots, for your blog post or something like that. So you have a consistent look and feel across your whole site. Spell and grammar checking tools are also a great add-on, to avoid typos or maybe missed capitalization of certain letters, ending of the sentences, etc. What I've used a lot are different plugins for the browser. I would say that besides some editors, I don't know, my personal editor was Visual Studio Code because I was working with Markdown documentation mostly. I would spend 90% of the time in the web browser, checking the documentation, checking how does it look in different resolution. And I've used, for example, a plugin that allowed me to resize the window, my web browser window, to a certain size, so I would be sure, oh, this will look good both on the desktop, on the tablet, or on small mobile phone. A lot of documentation is being used also as an SEO asset. Search engine optimization is done also in the documentation, because if you are creating something, you want for users to be able to find it, either user search engines or specialized directories and stuff like that. So do you have all of the metadata? Did you take into the consideration alt and names for images, for the accessibility? There are plugins that can help you and signalize you, oh, you're missing metadata, you're missing a title, you don't have the alt in these images. So be sure also to install them. When I work with the documentation, I also like to open a bunch of pages at the same time, to see if I have any broken links or something, especially if we are publishing a new section of the documentation, So I used plugins for the browser that allow me to open dozens of pages, URLs at the same time, or all of the links that are rendered on a single page. And then when I open them, I use the other plugin to get all of the URLs, all of the titles of those pages, so I can check if everything is rendered in the right manner. So use every tool that you can to make your life a little bit easier. Naming is one of the things that will pay out big on the long run. If you're working on a project and you will have a bunch of assets, you will have images, videos, you will have draft documents, you will have a final version of the documents. How can you make a connection between all of them? What I like to do is, for each project, in my case, for each issue or PR or ticket, I would create a folder. I would give a unique name to that folder. Usually a name would be a link to the issue number or PR number, something like DX-135, because I don't know, it was from developer experience team request, and this task had the ID of 135. And then I would use that same mark in every file name that was related to that project. So with searching, I could easily identify all of them. So use something that is unique. Ticket number, ID number, name of the project, something like that. Or you can add a date or timestamp to it, so we would know. For example, I would have a recurring task of updating documentation sitemap. So which sitemap is this? So I would append the date in a format so I could say, oh yeah, this is the latest one that we are going to publish. Also, check with the team, are there any special SEO requirements? You know, when it comes to the naming files, are there any conventions that are used across the company so you can incorporate them? I've mentioned images several times so far. When I talk about images, I primarily think of the static images, you know, PNGs, JPEG, GIF files, etc. But there are also some animated files, you know, GIF files can be also animated. Images can come in two flavors. They can be vector or they can be bitmap. So one of the things that I would say is a must is optimization for the size. Why? The faster the documentation loads up, users are going to be happier and the pages will render much faster. There will be less stress on your server, regardless if you're using some content delivery network or not. You know, try to create the best experience for your user. For example, I'm using this website tinypng.com, you know, to minimize all of the images before uploading them to the GitHub repo. One of the other things that is also important is using the right dimensions. You know, why take a screenshot at full HD resolution if you are talking about one button? You know, it won't be visible. So focus on that part so that users know what you are talking about. Choose the right format. My personal favorite is PNG. The second one is SVG. You know. So maybe for you something else would work. So choose the one that you think is the best. Go around the internet and take a look at the specifications and the best scenarios for each of those formats. And be sure if your framework supports or your CMS or wherever you are publishing your documentation, if the dark mode is supported, take a look how does your documentation look in a dark mode. I can tell you from personal experience, if you have PNG images that have transparent background and you have, I don't know, black lines, and you use that same image in the dark mode, you won't see anything. You know, you will see some crisp lines along somewhere. So be sure to check how does your documentation look both in the light mode and in the dark mode. And if it's needed, prepare either a separate set of images for the mode where they don't look good. In most cases, this means put a white background behind the image and it should then render correctly. AI has been hyped for quite some time now, and you can avoid it. You can write documentation without using the AI, but AI tools can help you a lot. In what way? You can do it in two aspects. You can use it as a tool that you use while creating the documentation, you know, for rephrasing, for expanding some sentences. This is especially useful for us who are not native English speakers, you know, and we want to try to write the best possible documentation. So we do use tools such as, I don't know, grammar checkers or spell checkers, and this is just like additional step to that. You can use AI for creating, I don't know, markdown tables if you don't want to use a lot of time on that, you know. So for all of that, AI is great, but always you must check the output, you know. Check if everything that is written is really, really correct and in accordance with your documentation, your style, and everything. I cannot stress this enough. Also, there is another thing that you can use. You can use tools such as Kepa AI. We are using that one for Mangrove, which is actually an AI bot that users can ask questions and get the answers based on our documentation. And this is also one of the reasons why documentation needs to be well written, because AI bots depend on it to provide users with answers. You know, if you have a poor documentation, you will have the poor input. You cannot expect to have a good or great output. So do check out those type of bots and see if they could perhaps enhance your documentation. One of the things that I really like about Write the Docs and tech writing is community. Community is absolutely fantastic. You know, I even attended some online webinars and meetups, you know, where there is no way that I could ever attend in person. And sometimes it was a small group, like 5 or 6 people, but you know, we're all technical writers. We all encountered the same problems. So it was nice to talk with people all around the globe. Because of the technical writing, I had a chance to work with people from Australia to South America, you know, and this is what I really, really like about technical writing. Since you're at the Write the Docs conference, you probably know about Write the Docs, but did you check out all of the meetups that are happening all around the world with Write the Docs label on it? You know, there is a bunch of them. And if you want, you can start your own chapter, you know, be that focus point, be the gathering point for technical writers in your vicinity, you know. So check out Write the Docs website. Check out your favorite social media platforms for individuals that are talking about documentation and technical writing. There is a bunch of great blogs out there that cover all of the aspects, you know, from handling problems to new ideas, advances in technical writing. Once you start reading them, you won't be able to stop. You know, you will get a bunch of ideas. Oh, this is something that I should definitely try out on my next project. So join Write the Docs communities, Slack channels, wherever you can find, and I'm sure that you will get a great deal of knowledge out of that. So this is the end. So what can I say as part of this presentation of my talk? A few years ago, I started my journey as a technical writer, and it was a whole new world. You know, it was a place where I could combine my love for the teaching and the transfer of the knowledge to others with my technical skills. I was able to combine those two things into the one new field, technical writing. If you are somebody who loves to communicate and you are a creative person, you know how to shape the knowledge, then the technical writing is the thing for you. And do join the community. Seek out mentors, start learning, and never stop learning. Form the new content, put it out, ask for people to review it, to give you feedback, and then apply that feedback to your next piece of content, and next one, and next one, and you will see how with some time you will be better than you have ever hoped that you could be. So this is all for me. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, send them out now.
Well, hi, Kruno. It's so good to actually see you in person. You have a ton of questions here, and I would just love
Okay.
to go through all of them with you.
Sure, Ingrid, sure. Far away.
Well, your very first one has many upvotes. I switched my career focus on technical writing to technical writing, and I am in the interview process. What advice do you have to be the best candidate you can be, since I have no idea what to expect?
So, okay. One of the things that I've noticed lately when we were hiring new technical writers is I've seen since I was working on an open source project, I've seen that people that were going through an interview process, they would check out our documentation repository, they would read the docs, they would leave the comments, create PRs, in that way we could see that they understand the process and the workflow that we are expecting for them to use if they do join the company, because we have everything explained in README file. So that is one of the things. What I would expect if I were the one who would interview a potential technical writer, I would love to see some of the examples. They don't have to be a big essays. Sometimes if you can explain things with few words, it is much better than a big chunk of text. I do love multimedia. Personally, I'm a big fan of everything video related. Video instructions are great. They're a pain to maintain, to keep them up to date.
Yeah.
But when you have them, the users can see every single step that you make. So do check out what type of the documentation you would be doing on that job, and see if you have some examples of any type of writing, blog posts or documentation that fits that position. And that is something that I would present or put out first, towards the people that are interviewing me.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's very good advice. I hope that really helps that questioner. So here's another one, which is also kind of oriented towards the interview process. Is it more important to have technical knowledge or to be a good writer when you start in technical communication? What's your
I would
opinion?
say my opinion is be a good writer. Especially, so I can tell you from my personal examples. So I've done dozens of different roles in the IT, but I've never been so far. I've never been a developer, and I've never been a database administrator. And so I have some of knowledge as a user, of databases and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so in Mangrove, when I was working as a technical writer, I was writing the documentation for the developers. I was part of developer experience team, and that's why I have subject matter experts, people who have the knowledge. And then it's just a matter of getting that knowledge out on the sun, knowing to ask the right questions and transform that knowledge that experts have into something that users need. So for me, I would say it's writing first. What for sure helps is understanding of the landscape,
Okay.
and so that you are not overwhelmed with all of the terminology that comes with
Mm,
certain field. But you don't have to be, in my opinion, you don't need to be a developer to write good API docs. It sure
okay.
helps, but you must have the language. You must have
Mhm.
understand all of the terms when it comes to API and endpoints, etc. But you're not the one who will be creating and developing the next version of the API.
Okay. All right. That's fair. It's a very interesting perspective. Love it. And do you have any recommendations or resources to improve your tech writing skills? What would you use to get better at technical writing?
I was fortunate enough to that on every gig that I had as a technical writer, either as a contractor or permanent employee,
Mm-hmm.
I had editors. And so
Mm.
fellows, my coworkers that would provide me feedback, my team lead that would leave me feedback, either on an internal commenting system or openly on GitHub. That is the best way to learn. And I was fortunate enough that they were native speakers or they were professors of English language, so they could really provide me with good feedback, and then I tried to incorporate all of that into my next articles or pages or whatever I was doing. So human feedback or coworkers or community, that is the most important one.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And as an editor myself, I'm like, yes, go editors. If you could I'm sorry, I used the wrong word. If you could impart one tip for someone wanting to get into technical writing, what would you say? What's the one tip you would give them to become a technical writer?
It is not something magical and mystical, something that lives in some country far, far away behind the seven mountains and the seven seas. Technical writing is just about communication, about creating the content that end users will understand. So if you know how to put things into simple terms, you're halfway already there.
Mm, I like that. That's really good advice. Like simplify, right?
Yeah. Strip everything that can be removed, so it's not overwhelming, because this is not a literal contest, where you have to put out a certain number of words, or where you must have certain number of objectives or something. The every person has its own writing style. So yeah, I do bring something of my own philosophy, my own spirit into every documentation. It is just natural, to do that. But the writing, the technical documentation isn't like writing a newspaper article or essay for school. It is about communicating something in a clear way.
Oh, yes, I love that. Really good definition of technical writing, or a good thing to highlight about it. Well, I'm afraid we have to wrap up the questions, and you have so many more. We will share these with you so you'll have an idea of just how engaged people were with your talk. Maybe how would you like them to contact you if they want to follow
The
up with these questions?
Sure, the best way is to look me up on the LinkedIn. That is
LinkedIn.
the best way. Yeah, that is the best way. That is actually one of the few social networks that I'm using these days. So do hit me up on the LinkedIn. I will be more than glad to connect with fellow technical writers.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good platform for just meeting people and getting to talk to people. I agree with you.